You have previously learned that we are currently in a time experiencing an increase in temperatures above average, and that increase has profound consequences on our planet. The first consequence that we can talk about is melting ice sheets and glaciers. And you can see here in this image that we have an ancient glacier from several decades ago. It's a very big ice mass, and compare the mountains in the background. These are the same mountains. This is what the area looks today. The glacier has receded drastically, leaving behind not only a lake, but also releasing all the water and providing that water into the oceans. If not only glaciers on land, but also the ice sheet above land, such as Greenland and Antarctica and the Antarctic ice sheet, melt, the consequence will be a sea level rise. So melting ice on land masses causes the sea levels to rise. And here this is a picture of a beach in Florida, where we have sea levels rising and the predicted sea level rise until 2030. So a lot of the beach will be gone by 2030. This is only a few years away from now. And by 2050, we will be even further. And scientists have been calculating, if we continue to have the warming with the rate it currently goes, we may experience sea level rises that may flood huge portions of our continents. And so in this lower image here, you can see this as the example of Florida, our neighbor state, where in red we see areas that are below 1.5 meters above sea level. What this means is if the sea level rises by 1.5 meters, all these areas will be affected by flooding and the ocean will reclaim the land. In blue, we see areas that are actually below 3.5 meters but above 1.5 meters of sea level. And so if we get an even higher sea level rise, we may flood substantial portions of Florida for the ocean to reclaim the land. And notice that lots of these areas, especially here in the south, we have large population centers, and also at the Gulf Coast we have large population centers. Most of these land centers will be predicted to be underwater, will be flooded. So flooding will become more predominant throughout the next few centuries in these areas. And for the United States, we have lots of areas that are above the predicted sea level rise, so people may have to migrate. But we need to look at the ramifications for other nations, other countries that do not have the option. Let's look at the Maldives in the Indian Ocean. This is a country entirely built on an island, or on multiple islands with almost no topography. So 100% of the country is actually located near sea level. So only a few feet of sea level rise will cause the entire country to be flooded, to be underwater. We can also melt sea ice. When sea ice melts, we will not have sea level rise associated with it because that ice is already in the water. However, we have other consequences. On the one hand, you can see here the Arctic Ocean, which is covered by sea ice. And in white we have the sea ice, and in dark we have the ocean. Notice the change in albedo. Really, really bright sea ice reflects lots of the sunlight and keeps the ocean and the polar region cold. If we do have oceanic water, this is dark blue. It actually traps energy and traps heat inside the water, and causes the oceans near the poles to warm up to facilitate and speed up the melt of the Arctic Ocean sea ice. What that means is we change ecosystems. For example, polar bears who depend on sea ice, who depend on large ice masses for not only their fur is white, so we can see that they are adapted to a landscape that is mostly dominated by snow and ice. But we also make way for animals to migrate through the Arctic Ocean to connect between the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. And so whales, for example, that could not previously migrate from the Atlantic to the Pacific because the sea ice didn't prevented them from breathing, are now capable of migrating from between the different oceans. And so interbreeding between different populations of whales is potentially possible and a consequence of the sea ice melting. We may also melt permafrost. Permafrost is permanently frozen soil in the Arctic region. And remember from our permafrost lecture that we have an active layer that always unfreezes in the summer, but we have a layer below that that never goes above freezing. In this layer, we contain a lot of different material, like organic matter, such as methane. As you know, methane is a very potent greenhouse gas. And so melting permafrost may even enhance the release of greenhouse gases into our atmosphere. And so melting permafrost may actually speed up a warming by releasing more and more greenhouse gas such as methane and carbon dioxide. And another climate change consequence is weather extremes. Weather extremes may cause long periods of drought, may include large precipitation events, may include storm events such as increased amount of tornadoes or hurricanes. For that, the Atlantic hurricane season in 2017 is a very good example. Such a distribution of storms that we currently had in the Atlantic in 2017 is not unusual. Scientists study the distribution and strength of hurricanes on a yearly basis for several decades at this point, and having the amount of storms that we've seen is the probability of having that is not unusual. So that may not be reflected in climate change. But as population, we may have noticed we had very, very heavy, intense storms that affected the United States mainland or our islands, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands, US Virgin Islands, that have been affected by several hurricanes in a row, and all of these hurricanes were extreme. Not only did we experience extreme rainfall with Hurricane Harvey over Texas, but we experienced extreme winds and rapid intensifications in not only the Atlantic, but also the Gulf of Mexico. So the probability for this to happen is not, unheard of. So it is possible, but the intensity and the rapid intensification may occur more in the future because of a hotter atmosphere and hotter ocean water may be able to intensify hurricanes to a unprecedented amount and unprecedented intensity of storm. Other weather consequences of climate change include shifting weather patterns. So all over the news we see that there is flooding in certain parts of the country, whereas the other part of the country is in such a drought that fires affect the country. So usually we have here in the south, we may have flooding and we may have lots of rain events, whereas in California and the western portions of the United States, may experience long periods of drought that trigger and facilitate the rapid spread of fire. So, after you completed the exercises, you should be able to distinguish between natural and anthropogenic causes of climate change at this point. You should be able to tell and also analyze the predicted consequences of climate change, and you are now capable of identifying problems of climate change arising for our society.